How do you get to know the history of your community? You can go to historic locations and see how the people lived, but how do you really get to know the people? Well, when you discover a treasure trove like this one, 31 diaries written by a young woman with anthropological accuracy, then you get to know your community. Nearly 500,000 words done by Alice Barrett Park from 1890 to 1900, all about the people of Vernon. Tonight on Pioneers in Places, Jo Jones, the woman who transcribed all 31 diaries, all 500,000 words, is in to tell the story of the city of Vernon as seen through the eyes of Alice Barrett Park.
I have been much struck with the kindliness and real politeness of the men here to a woman. Men who talk atrociously ungrammatically, who have dirty hands and dirtier clothes, seem to take quite a courtly air, and more real chivalry of manner than many so-called polished gentlemen when they address a woman. And there seems to be no limit to their kindness of heart.
Welcome to Okanagan Pioneers in Places. Mike Roberts with our storyteller today, Jo Jones from the Vernon Museum. And Jo, I know from Powerhouse Theatre, but also as a retired teacher, you said, I want to help in the museum somehow. What can I do? You volunteered to the museum people, and what did they do?
Well, my question had to do with computers, because before I left teaching, I had grown into a real computer nut. They welcomed me with open arms because at that time I was the only volunteer who was computer literate, and they said, we've got all of these databases that we need you to enter information into. It wasn't until the end of that first year that I was presented with what we're going to be talking about today, and that's the diaries of a woman called Alice Barrett Park. They had been donated by her great-nephew who lived in Port Dover, Ontario, and he brought them over, drove across country, delivered them. I arrived back from a trip to England to be told, Jo, we've got just the project for you. We want you to transcribe all of these diaries before they crumble away. So I thought, oh my Lord, it's probably going to be got up at 6:30, did the dishes, cooked the bread, but it wasn't. I mean, you have
this is number one that I'm opening right here?
That's number one, and you can see that the sentences and the paragraphs seem to fall fully formed onto the page. She writes beautifully. As I read through the diaries and as I transcribed them, I realized that we had a real treasure here. They're full of descriptions of people, places, full of her own ideas, her comments on people that she met and conditions that had to be endured by the pioneers of that time.
31 volumes.
31 volumes.
And look at, she doesn't even strike out. I haven't found a strikeout anywhere. Where did she pre-write these anywhere?
Well, maybe she took much of what she did from letters that she wrote, because she was certainly a prolific letter writer. But you're absolutely right. I found very few scratchings out. So
and not a recipe in the house, really. No. So she had a sort of an anthropologist's mind.
Absolutely. She looked upon these people as a stranger visiting a foreign land might, because she herself came from Port Dover in the east. She was raised in a large family, 8 altogether, in a very comfortable 4-bedroomed home on the banks of the river, not far from Lake Erie itself. And suddenly she found herself transported to the Spalumcheen Valley, to a tiny 3-room log cabin which had mice and you name it, they probably had it indoors. But she set about making it as home-like as she possibly could.
This was the home of her uncle and brother.
Her uncle and brother, who farmed Mountain Meadow Ranch, which is just north of Otter Lake. And
Whose idea was it to write the diaries?
well, it was her brother's, really, because he, up until that point, he had been writing diaries so that he could let the family back home know that what he was up to here. So when Alice arrived, he persuaded her, and she loved him dearly, her brother. And in the end, more out of a sense of duty than of anything else, than of any inner need to express herself, she began the diaries of their life in the West, and she went on until 1900.
So for a decade, 1891 to 1900,
yeah.
she wrote all about the people and the activities of Vernon.
You've got the history of the Okanagan during that final decade of the 19th century, which was so important from the point of view of immigration, development, from the white man's point of view, obviously.
So she arrives in Spalmsheen, 1891, at the very same time that the Shuswap and Okanagan Railway is coming into Vernon. The place is burgeoning.
The stagecoaches, that service is ending between Vernon and Sycamoose because you've now got a train. She met all the important and very well-known pioneers like the Schuberts, the Fortunes, the Croziers, you name it, she knew them.
And she writes about them.
And she wrote about them.
Thank goodness for Alice Park. We're going to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at the people that Alice Park met and wrote about. We'll do that right after this break.
Yesterday morning, Mr. Cameron came about 9 and drove me down to the lake. We rode over to inspect a boat which Captain Shorts is building. He is building a small boat to run in opposition to the large CPR steamer on Lake Okanagan, and is quite confident and hopeful that his small craft can run successfully in competition with the biggest monopoly in the world.
Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts talking with Joe Jones about Alice Park and her diaries. I hate to be indelicate about this, but she arrives here as kind of an elderly spinster, 29.
Yes,
I apologize, Alice.
No, she was 29, you're absolutely right, and she felt that she would never find anyone to marry. However, within a very short time of her arrival in the Spalmsheen, she was seen by a man called Harold Randolph Park, who was also an Easterner from London, Ontario, educated at Upper Canada College, driving a team of 8 mules in a freight service between Vernon.
Underemployed.
Absolutely.
Mr. Park got here quite early Monday and came in before tea to get warm and dry. I did not much care for his appearance. A short, fair man, partly bald and evidently over 40. I was half sorry Harry had let him come, but at tea time I knew he was a gentleman. One can always judge pretty well of a man's place in the social scale by the way he eats.
They became known as the happiest couple in the North Okanagan.
That's right, once they moved to Vernon. But before she married, of course, she met wonderful pioneers in the Spalmsheen area, including Catherine Schubert. And the diaries, number 4 diary here, has an account that Alice wrote of Mrs. Schubert's journey with the Overlanders when she was pregnant with her 4th child, finally arrived in Kamloops, gave birth to the first white child born in the interior. It's in 6 pages of the diaries here, Mrs. Catherine Schubert's story. Just amazing. I was flabbergasted when I read that.
When something like that shows up on a historian's plate, what does it represent?
It's manna from heaven. It's the treasure of the archives at Vernon Museum. It really is. Diaries are so rare, especially diaries written by women.
And now having this diary, you would think, did she restrict herself to telling the woman's story?
No, she made comments on the woman herself. We have 6 pages in here, and then of course she went on to describe the lives and the personalities of a host of other people there.
Mrs. Martin said it is beginning to be whispered that there is something queer about Mrs. Spink's illness, that she has contracted a habit of taking morphine and is not quite right in her mind. I will be so sorry if that is true. One of her sisters, Maisie's mother, died insane, but she, poor woman, had trouble enough to derange her mind. Her husband was untrue to her and openly acknowledged his preference for a very bad woman.
once she got to Vernon in 1893, after her marriage to Hal, she developed a little coterie of male friends. I call them her 4 cavaliers. One was Leonard Norris, the government agent at the time. Another was Jack McKelvey, the editor of the Vernon News, who passed on a lot of gossip. Another was Osborne Morris, who was a doctor, who told her all about his patients and how sick or how well they were.
Did she blow it all in the diary?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So much for the Hippocratic Oath, you know. And the 4th one was a man called Forbes Murray Kirby, who was a young surveyor. They were all in their 30s and all from the East, and they just adored her. She had an amazing effect on men.
She had, and it was all intellectual?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, whether you call it intellectual, totally. I mean, Leonard Norris gave her birthday gifts every year. Forbes Kirby would bring in the firewood and make sure she had plenty of water if her husband was out of town. And the other 2 just called regularly. Mind you, she was a superb cook.
So there are all sorts of reasons. You've got intellectual stimulation and a darn good meal.
That's right.
And
that's right.
She loved talking to men too, didn't she? I mean,
yes.
She wasn't much of a feminist, although I sensed that she was the consummate feminist.
Well, she was very well aware of her own intellectual gifts. There are several passages in the diaries where she's highly critical of men less intellectually endowed than herself. For instance, ministers of religion. She says in one passage, you know, how can men such as this be given such an amazing job when they're no good at it?
Harry and I went to the Methodist Church Sunday morning. I was sorry the sermon was quite lacking in interest. It seems strange to me that with such a subject men can be so dull. It is a pity that men who have not the gift of preaching are sent out as preachers. Surely there must be some other work they could do better.
And politicians as well. At one point she says it would take a Napoleon to sort out the situation which pertains with Vernon City Council at the moment. And 110 years on, you know, I wonder whether things have changed all that much.
I think it would puzzle a Napoleon to manage this town. Maybe I have used an unfortunate name, for it wouldn't at all puzzle anybody to manage to start a fight. But I doubt if even Napoleon could have led the United Vernonites against a common enemy.
She has terrible things to say about good men who refuse to take up the cause of civic leadership when dolts are doing it.
We are greatly disgusted over municipal matters. The mayor and 3 aldermen were appointed by acclamation, and a poorer selection could scarcely have been made. Sometimes one finds it hard to be patient with people who have time and ability to conduct public affairs well, and yet who will not come forward. I'm afraid my fault would lie in quite a different direction. I might become a busybody, but I really don't think I could ever be a drone.
She was pretty forthright then about what she was talking about.
Absolutely. She was very forthright too about the social conditions that she found existing in the town at the time. The water supply, we learn all about that. It ran through a dirty ditch down the middle of Main Street. Horses, you know, had various stations allotted to them, and there was no piping into houses. People went to this ditch to get their buckets of water. Whether they boiled it or not, I don't know, but typhoid was rife, cholera was rife, scarlet fever, smallpox, all of those diseases that nowadays we have under control in one way or another by vaccination or antibiotics, just killed people off right, left, and center. And I really think of her as a one-woman welfare service, because she was forever delivering a jug of cream here or a bowl of soup there. She sat up with people throughout the night if they were sick in order to give members of that sick person's family some kind of respite.
And then had the decency to write about it.
Absolutely.
And what was her, I don't know, when you read her writings, she's somehow self-deprecating, but you have to know that you can be self-deprecating if there's something
it's really substantial there.
Yes,
She's
yes.
very proud.
Yes, she's very proud, but she was guided throughout her life by a very deep sense of belief in God. She was an Anglican, and I believe that very much of what she did and what she wrote was guided by Christian principles. Her delivery of all these bowls of broth and soup and everything, very much she was the Good Samaritan of the Bible.
Yeah. In addition to the characters who drew a lot from her and were her cavaliers, she had other people that she recognized in the area and loved to have dealings with.
Oh, absolutely. One of the most important, of course, was Lady Aberdeen, the Countess of Aberdeen, who owned with her husband the Coldstream Ranch in the area, who was the head of the National Women's Council, and we set up a chapter in Vernon of the National Women's Council.
Let's tell that story when we come back after this break, because, I mean, it's not often you can connect with a vice-regal person way out in the hinterland of British Columbia, but Alice Park does. We'll do that right after this break.
About 5, I had a visit from Lady Aberdeen. She drove up in great style with her coachman and footman and paid me quite a long visit. Of course, it was all about the Women's Council, but Hal laughs at me and says I'll be very puffed up after hobnobbing with the Countess.
Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Joe Jones talking about Alice Park's diaries. And we just mentioned Lady Aberdeen when we went into just before the break. This is a big woman, Lady Aberdeen, and Alice Park is good with describing Lady Aberdeen.
Absolutely. This was a real mover and shaker, a feminist from way back, a social worker herself. Vernon was never the same after she left it. She developed the first Vernon chapter of the National Council of Women. Also, the Victorian Order of Nurses is one of her brainchildren. She came, set up the local chapter of the Women's Council, and managed to co-opt Alice into being its first corresponding secretary.
Saturday night, they appointed a committee of ladies to meet Her Excellence yesterday afternoon and consult as to the advisability of establishing a branch of the council here. I was one of those chosen. There were 22 altogether. We met in the reading room and had a very enjoyable meeting. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be associated in any way with a woman like Lady Aberdeen. I believe she is very good, and though I can't exactly say that I am very hopeful of any great results from this Vernon branch, I still think we ought to try. After all my protestations, I have accepted a place on the committee, that of corresponding secretary.
Lady Aberdeen really influenced social conditions in Vernon. She was behind the idea of the first hospital, which Clara Cameron really took and ran with as an idea. So Lady Aberdeen, a magnificent character.
And intellectually the equivalent of Alice Park,
Absolutely.
so Alice could talk with her about
Absolutely.
everything.
Yeah, at one point Lady Aberdeen and her entourage rode over from the Coldstream Ranch to the BX Ranch over the hills when Hal Park happened to be manager there. So that was just a marvelous event for her.
Intent on getting the communication going and getting things done. This is the thing. Just getting things done was something that women seem to have the ability to do.
Well,
men sort of yammered around the subject.
Well, certainly with social issues, Mike, because I think probably women were more involved with all those social issues. They were the ones who looked after the people who were the sick. They were the ones who did all the cooking and delivered it to the sick. And they were the ones who pushed the husbands to do something about it.
When we think to circumstances of the day, we haven't mentioned child mortality,
No,
but Alice Park had a relative whose child died
That's
very young.
right. The child didn't die. Actually, it was the relative, her sister-in-law. Harry's wife married at the age of 18. By the age of 22, she delivered her third son, and a week later died, I believe, of puerperal fever, childbed fever. So Harry was left a widower, bereft with these two tiny children, and immediately returned to Port Dover. But there were other things. Let's not say that Alice was all sweetness and light. She was very opinionated, and I'm afraid she was quite racist in her attitudes, certainly to the local Aboriginal community and also to the Chinese community that was here. But during her time at the BX Ranch, she had a Chinese cook, and it is wonderful to see the transformation in her appreciation of the Chinese as a race. She went from being very uncomfortable in his presence to admiring his honesty, his diligence, his loyalty, and his sense of humor. They were very much on the same wavelength, so that's a delightful aspect of it.
And when you read a diary, you're reading the realities of the relationships of the time.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
he was Gu Yi?
Gu Yi or Lu Yi. She was very capricious in her spelling. That's one of the things I had to cope with in these diaries. But he was just a delightful man, and he comes across beautifully. She uses accents in her work, and his Chinese accent comes across.
She runs through that.
Absolutely.
Why did she stop writing? What was the... I mean, and it just stopped like that.
In the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a paragraph, in the middle of the page, on May the 16th, 1900. I don't know why. I can speculate that she stopped writing because she had just conceived her one and only child at the age of 39. And maybe she fainted, I don't know. But the diaries just come to an absolute stop, and she never took up her pen again. And 9 months later, her little daughter, Emily Louisa Park, was born February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1901, and died November the 13th of that same year. Again, I don't know from what cause. I've checked many sources to find out, but haven't been able to. She received the largest child's funeral to that date in Vernon, according to the Vernon News. And of course, Alice and Hal never had any more children.
And they left the Okanagan when?
They left in 1905, returned to Port Dover. Hal had spent his final years as postmaster in Vernon, and Alice worked at the wickets, basically as assistant postmaster. There they returned to Port Dover, and apart from a short period in Fort Saskatchewan when they returned to Alberta and then returned to Port Dover, they never went west again. And Hal died in 1914, and she outlived her husband by 38 years, dying at the age of...
This picture here is her at 91.
91 in 1952. She died after a series of strokes.
1861 to
1952.
What a wonderful story. And this is just now, the existence of these diaries is just now being made available to the public.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you anticipate there to be a pouring over these documents by everybody.
Yeah, it's our intention to make everything available to scholars, researchers who are dealing with women's studies, women's history, the history of the Okanagan, you name it. I mean, it is so full. Well, it's nearly 500,000 words altogether.
I congratulate you on your diligence in getting it done. Jo Jones, from a volunteer with the Vernon Museum, and the subject, Alice Barrett Park and her diaries. Thanks for being here. See you next time on Pioneers and Places.